Welcome to the Red Sneaker Podcast, your guide to success in the worlds of writing and publishing. Now, here's your host, best-selling author and founder of the Red Sneaker Writers Center, William Bernhardt.
Hello, Red Sneaker Writers. This is episode 34, going out on December 16, 2019. This podcast is for Red Sneaker Writers, people who are serious about having a writing career and want some practical knowledge to help them do it. The big news, at least in my universe, is that tomorrow, December 17, is the release date for my new novel, Trial by Blood, the third book in the Daniel Pike series. But another author has had the audacity to have a book released on the same date. And that would be my friend Barry Friedman, whose memoir, 4 Days and a Year Later, is also coming out on December 17. Despite the unspeakable audacity of releasing a book and crowding my release date, it is a beautiful memoir in which he deals with a difficult subject with an astounding amount of grace and beauty and talent. My interview this episode will be with Barry Friedman. But first, the news. My first news item today has to do with continuing rumors that Simon & Schuster may be on the market, and in fact the Big Five might become the Big Four. As a lot of you probably already know, Simon & Schuster is owned by CBS, and CBS just merged with Viacom, which it had been with in the past, but that's all complicated. Anyway, now it's Viacom CBS. Well, that means good stuff for a lot of people like Star Trek fans, because instead of Star Trek rights for television shows being in one place and film rights being in another, now they're unified, which is why we've got like 4 Star Trek series in production or pre-production and 2 different Star Trek movies in production. But what does it mean for Simon & Schuster, the book publisher? Possibly not good things. People have been speculating that Simon & Schuster could be sold for a long time. One analyst has called Simon & Schuster, quote, a drag on the company's results. And many people on Wall Street are theorizing that Viacom CBS will shed all of its non-core assets, which certainly would include this publishing house. Well, what happens if this comes true? What happens if the Big Five become the Big Four? And that's only going to happen if one of the other 4 buys Simon & Schuster, which is the most likely result. Would Random House like to get a little bigger? Probably. And there are a lot of good assets for a publishing house there. But as traditional publishing gets narrower, we're likely to see them putting out fewer and less diverse titles. Will that give them the clout they need to fight Amazon? Or will that just increase the trend of traditional publishing, New York publishing houses having less and less influence in the publishing world? You tell me. Here's another story. On the trademark front, you may remember last year I reported on an author who attempted to trademark the word cocky because that was a title that appeared in the author's titles a bunch. That was not successful. You can't copyright a reasonably common word. Nobody owns a word. Well, this is even better. A new application has been filed by an author who wants to trademark the word dark. Yeah, dark, D-A-R-K, which is also a word that occurs in its titles. Now, being a lawyer myself, I normally know better than to prognosticate about the results of future trials and court actions because judges are unpredictable. But I'm willing to bet a great deal that this application is not going to be successful. Dark is a common word. Nobody owns it, even if you've used it over and over again. And I'm really only mentioning this story because I'm hoping to make the point clear to all of you Red Sneaker writers. You cannot trademark a common word. You need to come up with something unusual, something distinctive. This is why you see so many brand names that are misspelled, Quick Trip without the C in quick, that sort of thing, because that makes it trademarkable, because there's something unique about it. But trademarking common words is never going to work. Speaking of Amazon, which I've already done once, how could we get through a news session without mentioning Amazon? In addition to everything else Amazon is doing, a new report shows that Amazon is now the third largest advertising platform in the United States. Can you imagine? So it's not quite enough that they sell more than 50% of all books sold in the United States, vastly more than any other retail agency. It's not enough that they have this hugely fabulous cloud computing business, which in fact makes more money than their retail business, even though they're the number one retailer in the United States, even bigger than Walmart. Now they're the number 3 advertising platform. It would appear that Amazon cannot be stopped. And it would also appear that many people are doing what I've suggested doing, taking out Amazon ads. If you're serious about wanting to increase the sales of your books, that is probably the best investment you can make. One more story, a report that came from a UK newspaper. And I say that up front because I think it colors everything. You need to understand that this is the United Kingdom, not the United States, that this report is based strictly on numbers coming from traditional publishers. But based on those numbers, the Telegraph is predicting that in 2020, sales of audiobooks will overtake eBook sales. Well, we all knew audiobooks were on the rise in a big way, but that seems extreme. What did they base that on? Well, they say that sales of eBooks are down by 4%, which may be true if you're only getting your numbers from the traditional publishers, not Amazon. They also point out that print book sales have fallen 5.4%, whereas audiobook sales have increased by 43%. So while all the other categories are down, audiobook sales are booming. Why would that be? Well, mostly has to do with technology, doesn't it? And the fact that everybody's now got a cell phone in their pocket. And many people have wireless headphones, earbuds, or something like that. And there are other factors too. The internet makes it so easy to download an audiobook without any kind of physical medium. There are a lot of big name narrators getting into it now because it's more profitable than it used to be. So people like Michelle Obama and Elton John are bothering to record the audio for their own books. Well, maybe, but I note looking at their statistics that audiobook sales are still going to have to increase by another 30% before they overtake ebook sales. Maybe 30% is possible. I don't know. I will point out that those ebook, you see them in the United States too, the articles about how ebook sales are falling. They're not. That's only true if you only look at the numbers from print publishers, from the traditional Big Five publishers or AAP statistics. And bear in mind, as we've talked about in the past, that the Big Five are clearly trying to diminish ebook sales. In some cases, in many cases, in fact, making the ebook more expensive than the hardcover, trying to drive people toward print sales. If you look at the whole picture, including the more than 50% of all books sold by Amazon, ebook sales are far from falling. In fact, they dominate in many fields like popular fiction. So I doubt if in the big picture, audiobook sales are going to overtake ebook sales next year, although I certainly think it could happen at some point. And I do think this indicates that audiobooks that have been super strong for years are only going to get stronger. So I will say again, Red Sneaker writers, if you don't have an audiobook of anything that you own the rights to, it's probably a mistake. You're just leaving money on the table. One last story, and this comes from something from Reedsy. That's Reedsy, a webpage that has a lot of services for writers, but now they've developed something called the Drama Plot Generator. which is just exactly what it sounds like. You're having trouble coming up with a plot? Let their AI give you one. Basically, you give them information, filling out a form, basically online. You tell them the protagonist, the secondary characters, other details, and then the AI gives you a plot. Well, I doubt that that is the best way to come up with a plot. On the other hand, if you're doing that 60-chapter outline like I tell people to do in story structure, and you've already read Perfecting Plots, so you know about the 3 levels of conflict and inciting incidents and all that, and you're still stuck in the middle and can't think of what to have your characters do, I can think of worse things than going to Drama Plot Generator, maybe not taking what the AI gives you chapter by chapter, but if it sparks a good idea or two, why not? We all know that the middle is usually the hardest part to outline, to keep interesting, and the place where books often sag. So, you do what you gotta do to make your book the best it can possibly be. My interview for this episode is with Barry Friedman. Barry's been on the podcast before, so you may already know that he is a stand-up comic, has been for many years, but he is also a fine writer with several books, and he's got a regular political feature that he writes. He's written for Esquire and other publications, but this is his first attempt at a true memoir. And it's a memoir that approaches a subject, a topic, so difficult that I think most people would not have the courage or strength or talent to address it. You'll hear all about that in the interview, but my point is that he not only has the courage to do it, he does it beautifully and with such grace and such talent that I predict that far from being depressed, you will find yourself invigorated and renewed and perhaps even inspired by this wonderful book. But that's enough of me. Let's hear Barry. Barry, thanks for being on the podcast.
Always a pleasure.
Your new book, 4 Days and a Year Later, a beautiful piece of work. Would you call this a memoir?
It's half a memoir, if that's a category. We can create that.
That's not a category.
It is memoir. It is lament. What else? What else other categories could we use? It's a memoir because it's about me dealing with my son's death. So it's more or less a memoir. So it says I'm the one who's still living. Yes, I guess you would call it that.
Right.
And it's sharing it. It's not really my story, but of course it is my story. It's my son's story through my eyes, telling him his story through my eyes. So it's a book, and it's apology. It's an elegy. It's a eulogy. It's cathartic. It's about getting from here to a specific place, finite place in your life where you have to then get on with the rest of life. Mm-hmm. I don't know if that answers your question, but that's as good as I got.
Well, it's a difficult subject, and but one you're not shying away from. A lot of people have challenges in their lives, but not everybody sits down and tries to write about it. How'd you get there?
Well, I got there essentially the writing part of it because it's what we do. And I guess if I were a builder, I try to build something. If I were a painter, I would have painted something. So this is what I do. And in an effort to sort of not keep him alive, that sounds too grandiose, but in order to capture the moment, to make the moment matter, to make it matter between him and me, and how people go through the immediate aftermath of a death with family and all the other dynamic, just seemed a good way to deal with this death of my son that I prepared for because he had been doing drugs. And so I knew the day was coming. I knew this weekend was coming. And again, as a writer, that's what I was sort of moved to do.
Why don't you give everyone, I've kind of jumped into the middle of this, why don't you give everyone the background on this story, and then we'll talk a little bit about your writing process.
Yeah, my son died on a Friday afternoon, and he had been doing drugs for 10 years before that. And so I knew eventually this call would happen, and it happened. And so I went over there on a Friday afternoon where his parents, his mother and her new husband lived. And Paul was dead. He was